Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. On November 11th, COP29 begins in Baku, Azerbaijan, a petrostate. COP29 is the 29th Conference of the Parties of the countries and jurisdictions signatory to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So for 29 years, countries have been meeting in remote locations to try and stop climate change. Of course, thousands of them have to fly there every time, and usually when they fly back, one of the first things they recommend is that you should stop flying. Most people don't know that in the lead up to these COP conferences, there are about 1,000 other conferences in various places around the world where they all get together and try and break down what they're going to talk about at the real COP conference, which is coming up on November the 11th, and it runs until November 22nd. So it's in Azerbaijan, and a number of climate justice groups are now saying that they will not go because of human rights violations. There are others who are not wanting to go because it's a petrostate, and it was only last year that fossil fuels, the words fossil fuels, were finally included in the document produced by the last COP28 conference, which was held in a petrostate. So you may wonder, what's the purpose of all these COP conferences then? If you look at the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's gone up proportionately with the number of conferences that have been held, ironically. And so has the volume of oil, gas, and coal used in the world. Of course, not so much in the Western world, because we are the carbon dupes. We are the ones who have been trying desperately to reduce the CO2 emissions in our countries. So we've been decarbonizing, and basically, like Germany, we've pushed ourselves into a degrowth and deindustrialization mode, whereas countries like China, India, all the other developing nations, they've been just booming along just fine with lots and lots of fossil fuels, and they don't feel guilty about it at all, whereas we do, right? We're always crying about it. Right now, people are trying to push through these various agreements to have $1 trillion a year for climate finance. Now, all the years before, this is to keep the Paris Agreement, all the years before, they had voted on having a $100 billion fund per year, a green climate fund that would help developing nations build renewables. Well, now they think they should have a $1 trillion a year fund so as to meet Paris commitments. Well, I think we can say that the Paris Agreement is pretty much dead and gone, especially now that Donald Trump has won the presidency in the United States. Because the first thing he did when he got into office was he pulled out of the Paris Agreement. Now, he was democratically elected, and you would think that people might respect what his views are, but no, the climate cartel, as the House Judiciary Committee calls it, is already planning how they can get around his maneuvers on climate, because they still want to spend $1 trillion of your money every year for climate change. Now, if you haven't figured it out yet, a lot of what climate change is about, it's about degrowth. That's what they want. After the Paris Agreement was signed, Ivo de Boer, who was then the executive director of the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, he said that to meet Paris targets, we'd have to shut down the global economy for 2 years. Did anything happen recently that resembled that? And at the same time, another group of people, the city mayors, had a ROOP, a consulting firm, come up with a plan for them so that each person would have a carbon footprint of 2.9 tons CO2 equivalent by 2030 and 0 by 2050. Canadians have a carbon footprint individually of about somewhere between 14 to 17 tons carbon dioxide equivalent. So just imagine what it'd be to cut your consumption of energy down to 2.9 tons CO2 equivalent. I know you think, oh, Michelle, nobody's dreaming of doing anything like that. Well, you need to read our analysis, Getting to Net Zero, and just see that the Canada Energy Regulator has planned for you a reduction in your consumption of energy, a reduction in consumption of energy for all industries in Canada, and they're going to try and meet net zero targets by rationing you. So at the same time, they're all going to fly around the world, this time to Baku instead of going to Paris, and they're all going to fly back and tell you that you shouldn't fly anymore because you're harming the climate. And they're going to probably tell you that you need to have a personal carbon ration so that you don't misuse energy. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.